Now, before we continue on with chapter 26 of Wolf Hollow, I just want to remind you to subscribe to this channel, especially if you are enjoying these videos this far into the book. Chapter 26. It didn't take long for Mrs. Gribble to spread this second piece of news. People often complained about her eavesdropping and swore they didn't listen to her gossip, but the stories she spread had always proven true, except one April Fool's Day when someone fed her a bogus tale about a wagon train full of gypsies setting up camp in Bachtown, and she was widely regarded as the county crier. By supper time, everyone knew that Toby was not responsible for Ruth losing her eye, and there was now some doubt about whether he'd pushed Betty down the well. But doubt wasn't enough. A jury can have doubt if it wants to, the constable said, but the police still have to find the man. He sat in our kitchen with my father and grandfather. Even James, for once, sat at the table instead of under it. The dogs had led the search party into the barn and out again, across the pastures and around the house, up the lane and back down into the woods and orchards, before finally setting a course away from our hills, west toward Ohio, which was not so very far from here. They'd followed the scent for a couple of miles, maybe more, before Officer Coleman declared this a certain trail unlikely to loop back. That's when he sent us home, my father said. They're still on the trail and will stay on it until they're relieved by fresh dogs and men. Constable Oleska looked worn out and not at all sorry to be done with searching. They're sure to catch up with Toby in a day or two, unless he hitches a ride. Do you think they'll go into Ohio after him? My father said. Yes, I expect they will, or hand it over to the Ohio police. But when they hear Annie's latest bulletin, and they will if they haven't already, they'll apt to stand down a bit. He turned to look at me. I guess it's a good thing Mrs. Gribble listened in on that call you made to Andy, he said. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't scolding either. Imagine her doing that. Imagine you doing that, my father said to me. Are you angry? I was prepared for people to be angry with me, though it didn't matter, as it once would have. Not angry, my father said. Not angry at all, my grandfather said. He smiled at me from his end of the table. Gumption's a good thing, if you ask me. So is industry, my mother said, as she slid a pan of pork chops into the oven. Annabelle, those carrots aren't going to peel themselves. I'll do it, Henry said, rising from his chair. He didn't look at me as he took my customary place at the sink, but I knew he could see me anyway. We had the same hands, the same long fingers, the same way of holding a knife. How come Henry gets to help and I don't? James said. You're absolutely right, my mother handed him a saucepan. You can start by putting a cup of milk into this pan. Aunt Lily came home just then to the sight of Henry and James helping to get supper ready while I sat at the table with the men. Am I in the right house? She said. She took off her coat and hung it in the mudroom closet. Annabelle, have you lost the use of your legs? Easy, Lily, my father said, as if she were a fractious horse. It's been a long day. As if I don't know it. Do you have any idea how much mail comes through that post office? It's a wonder anything else gets done around here, with all the letters people write. She helped herself to a cup of coffee and sat down at my mother's place. I thought that she had somehow missed the news of Betty's death, so I told her. Betty Glengarry died this morning, Aunt Lily, which I heard from at least a dozen people today, she said. I don't work in the Timbuktu post office, Annabelle, if there even is such a thing. I wanted to throw something at her. I thought you might not know. Why? Because I'm not gasping and fainting like all the other ninnies? She looked at me over her glasses. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Annabelle. He has his reasons. My grandmother came into the kitchen just in time to hear this. Reasons for what? She asked. For taking Betty home. My grandmother shook her head. I don't know where you got such a hard heart, Lily. Not hard, but not soft either. Plenty of those around here already. I thought if I had to listen to Aunt Lily for one more minute, I would turn to stone. Since the boys are helping with supper, can I go up to my room for a while? For a little while, my mother said. I'll call you when I need you. I can set the table, James said. Of course you can, my grandmother cooed, ruffling his hair. Whoever said you couldn't? From my bedroom, I could hear the others down below, the sound of pots and pans, dishes and flatware, voices, a chair scraping, all of which had the effect of making me feel even more lonely. Tricking Andy into a confession, knowing that the police might be more gentle with Toby if they caught him, did not help much. From my closet, I took my grandfather's coat and slipped it on. There was room inside for two of me. I lay down on my bed, drew my knees up into the coat, and fell sound asleep. I didn't hear my mother call me down for supper. I didn't hear her open my bedroom door or turn off my light. I didn't feel her pull my bedspread up over me, and I didn't wake later that night at the sound of the telephone ringing. After such an early bedtime, I was up well before most everyone. I found my mother in the kitchen brewing coffee, but no one else. The world was dark beyond the windows. I watched her for a moment. She looked different, not knowing that anyone was there, all of her facing inward as I had on the path when Toby took my picture. An inkling told me to go back to bed before she saw me. Perhaps it was how sad she looked, though I couldn't see her face, that urged me to go away quickly so I could have another hour, maybe two, before I found out why. I was still in my clothes from the day before, still wearing my grandfather's coat. How silly I must have looked when she turned toward me, a mug of coffee in her hand, and stopped so suddenly that the coffee sloshed over the rim and onto the floor. "Annabelle, you startled me," she said, reaching for a rag. "What are you doing up so early?" I couldn't sleep any more. I sat down at the table. "Did they find Toby yet?" "You heard the telephone ring?" I shook my head, my heart shrinking. "Who called?" My mother rinsed out the rag and sat across from me. She set her mug down carefully. "The constable called," she said. "He had just heard from Officer Coleman, and he thought we'd want to know what happened." I didn't know how beautiful my mother was until I saw her in that moment, as she gathered herself to tell me that Toby was dead. I held my hands inside the sleeves of my grandfather's coat while she told me that they had caught up with him just before the border into Ohio, sleeping under the Mahoning River Bridge. She told me that when the hounds reached him, they laid down in the leaves along the edge of the river and took no interest in the man himself, who stood up when the policeman called his name. Perhaps, she said, he wanted to be standing when the next part came, because when they told him to lie down again on his face and put his hands behind him, he refused. And when they pulled out their pistols and told him a second time, he slipped one of the long guns off his back, and they shot him. They didn't know that his gun was useless, she said quietly. They didn't know anything about what had happened here. They only knew that they were supposed to catch a dangerous man and take him into custody. I pushed the coat's long sleeves up my arms and dried my face with my hands. "Why would he do that?" I said. "Grab his gun like that. It didn't even work, and Toby wouldn't have shot at them anyway. He just wouldn't." My mother sighed. "I don't think so either," she said, "and I don't know why he did what he did, except maybe he had had enough of this world, Annabelle. After all this time of living with how sad he was, he decided that he couldn't stay here any more now, when he had us." My mother shook her head. "I don't know, Annabelle. But think about how it feels when your hands are so cold they go numb, how it's only when they start to thaw out that you realize how much they hurt." I spent some time looking at my hands, thinking about his. He said that he would have liked to have had a daughter like me. My mother smiled. "Anybody would," she said. "I remember the night I'd taken Toby to the barn for safekeeping. Do you know that he was afraid of heights?" She shook her head, but I shamed him into climbing the loft ladder, and he never hesitated after that. Just did it like it was nothing. My mother got up and poured me a small cup of coffee with plenty of cream and sugar. "You knew him better than I thought you did." He knew me before I knew him. And we drank our coffee in silence as the sun came in through the windows and all the colors with it.